um, I struggle to sleep, so I said to myself, I will comment uh, one of my favorite books, How to Read a Book. Um, and I'm not scared to say that my admiration and love for Mortimer J. Adler is infinite, because I'm not afraid to say that dead people, I love them infinitely. Um, I'm in a more ambiguous relationship with living people because, yeah, but I will comment with my Hegelian view. The main purpose in reading books is to gain increased understanding. And to increase is a quantitative determination, a degree, one might say, and it's a mixture of quantity and quality, because when you increase your understanding, you are able to connect the dots, so to speak, to make logical connections between many events, many facts, many pieces of information, and this quantitative aspects turns into a qualitative aspect, which means that you quantitatively go from lack of understanding to enlightenment or illumination. So we find a unity of quantity and quality, and yeah, readers are people who are still accustomed to gain a large share of their information about and their understanding of the world from the written world. And if I had to give a personal opinion, which opinions are worthless, but the reason why so many people struggle to understand the world is because many people do not have the leisure or the will or the interest in reading. And he says that we can gather information about the world from television, information acquired through spoken words and through observation. So we have the empirical aspect. We are plunged into the world, and we can, through the activity of our mind, try to understand the world in which we live. We can gain information by having dialogues with others or by watching television, but reading enables us to have a more detached, a more calm, a more intellectual way, because in a book, the main ideas are condensed and contained and expressed, whereas in the it's a mediated form of knowledge, whereas observation, dialogue, and television, for instance, are immediate forms. We are directly in relationship to the to the to the information. So strictly speaking, with a book also, because we have an immediate relationship with the written page, but reading is more cognitively demanding, and it enables us to see the words, which are just symbols for expressing ideas, which are logical categories. So reading is very important because it enables one to gather a logical understanding of the world. He says, so apparently the book was written in the 1940s, but then republished in the 1970s, so I don't know, I have the edition of 1970s. He says that the visual communication of news events has enormous impact. We are more struck by a visual image than by a cognitive understanding. So images can be deceiving. It may be seriously questioned whether the advent of modern communications media has much enhanced our understanding of the world in which we live. That's a good question. He says, we do not have to know everything about something in order to understand it. Too many facts are often as much of an obstacle to understanding as too few. I will translate in Hegelian logical categories. To know, in the meaning that he employs, means to have broad consciousness of many facts, to have the facts and the events present in your consciousness. To understand, as he envisioned it, is to be able to extract the universal, which is the logical structure of the particular or singular events, and to understand something, as distinguished from knowing in the broad sense, means to be able to grasp the cognitive logical structure. And he says that too many facts can prevent us from understanding, from grasping the logical truth, and too few can also prevent us from understanding. So in order to grasp the logical truth about an event, a thing, one must have the proper measure of empirical data, and one must be able to extract the universal from the particular. And let me give an example. If one knows the concept of a tree, what is a tree? One doesn't need to see all the trees in the world, which is impossible, but if one has grasped through a knowledge of biology and organic chemistry, the concept of what a tree is, the idea of the tree, the universal within each singular tree, then all the trees one meets, whatever their species or their particular aspect or their individual characteristic, one will be able to grasp the universal, and one will be knowledgeable in botanic or biology. We moderns are inundated with facts to the detriment of understanding, and the purpose of studying logic is to be able to extract the universal, which is always true, from the infinite sea of singular and particular events. So what I'm trying to promote with this channel is to give my viewers a broad vision of the totality, and to to give them the interest in studying logic, so that they will be able to extract the rational kernel out of the infinite amount, the infinite ocean of facts which are coming at us in our everyday experience through the sensory impression and the people who talk to us, the daily news. We are bombarded with informations all the time, and if we're not capable of distinguishing, of separating the unessential from the essential, the singular from the universal, we will be lost in the sea of an infinite amount of facts. So the purpose of studying philosophy and logic is to be able to have a clear, universal, structured view of reality. And this man, Mortimer Adler, he understood it very well because he was trained in philosophy. He had probably a PhD in philosophy, so he was very aware of that. The average layman, the average person, inserts a packaged opinion into his mind, somewhat like inserting a cassette into a cassette player. He then pushes a button and plays back the opinion whenever it seems appropriate to do so. So in the 1970s and maybe even 40s, I don't know, he already had this view of the average person just repeating without much thinking about it what he or she has heard on the radio, in the news, on television, and without thinking critically, without examining the truth or the deception of the knowledge. So he encourages the reader to think for himself and to think critically, and to examine the true value of the events and the information which are constantly coming at him. He says that reading can be more or less active. So reading is an activity, it's a qualitative endeavor, but every quality has its quantity. And he says that the more active the reading, the better. And to be a better reader, which is a quality, it means a quantitative determination to exert a greater range of activity which is an extension, more activities must be produced with more effort, which is an intensive determination. So in order to read well, which enable to understand well, one has to have an extensive and intensive activity, and a good reading of a book is the reading which has the proper measure, with concentration, a certain amount of time dedicated to reading the book, many faculties of the mind, imagination, reasoning, abstracting, memory must be exerted in order to have a good reading of the book. So if I might give a piece of advice to the viewers of this channel, of this video, if you have the opportunity, take the time whenever you can to take a good book, a book that you think is worthy of being studied and read carefully, and plunge yourself in the book and think about this book, and write the most important passages, reflect upon it, and meditate upon it. If I give a piece of advice, read Hegel's Logic. But if you don't want to, any book that you think is worthy of your interest and your time, and try to exert an effort in understanding the deep meaning of the book. Yeah. Reading and listening are thought of as receiving communication from someone who is actively engaged in giving or sending it. So we are in a state of passive reception, in the sense that we welcome information from the outside. But he says that it's not a passive activity. The reader or listener is much more like the catcher in a game of baseball. A ball is sent at him, is thrown at him, and his purpose is to try to grasp the baseball, the ball. And so it's a passive, in a sense that a theoretical activity is passive, in a sense that one has to adapt and to adopt one's ideas to the external world, and to make the external world one's own in mind and thought. So it's passive in a sense that it is the exterior which influences the inner structure of the mind, but at the same time it requires an act of the will and a great effort to change one's own internal perspective and to try to adapt the proper understanding. So it's trying to catch the ball. I've never played baseball, but there's probably a deep speculative truth in baseball. The ball is a simple unit in a game of baseball. It is either completely caught or not. So we have the idea of totality. Either you catch the ball or you don't. You can't do it half. You cannot grasp half a ball. It's either the whole or nothing. But yeah. A piece of writing, however, is a complex object. It contains within itself many quantitative moments or aspects in the realm of words and sentences and arguments and logical reasoning. The amount, which is a quantitative determination, the amount the reader catches symbolically, the quantity of information that the mind extracts and is able to understand from the studying and the reading of the book, depend on the amount of activity he puts into the process. The skill. To be skilled is a quality. That's a skillful person. He's very skilled, he's very gifted. But quality and quantity are two modes of the same logical determination. So a reader who is skilled is able to exert a greater amount of activity, a greater range, like I said, memory, reflecting, reasoning, imagining, critically examining, and so on. In the process, reading is a process. It's a self-unfolding and self-development of trying to go through a state of ignorance or lack of knowledge to a state of more knowledge, and eventually mastery of the topic which you are studying. The more active reader is the one who can perform, which is an action, each of the acts involved, reasoning, etc., more skillfully. Yeah. If the book is completely intelligible to you, then the author and you are as two minds in the same mold. That's a very profound idea. If one is capable of understanding completely the mind of an author, one becomes one with this other mind, and equality of spirit is achieved. And yeah, sometimes you have to understand enough, again a quantitative determination, to know that you do not understand it all. So if you do not understand everything about a book, that's not a problem. And I do not understand many things about Hegel, but to know that you don't know is already a knowledge. The knowledge of the unknown is the unknown is not unknown because what it is known about the unknown is that it is unknown. So that's Hegelian dialectics gone insane, but there, there's rationality within insanity. Um, so yeah, if you accept that there are things that are unknowable, you are already on the verge of transcending your lack of knowledge, because yeah, with nothing but the power of your own mind, you gradually lift yourself. Gradual is a degree, it's a quantity mixed with quality, it's a measure. We find again the categories of Hegel's logic, which are everywhere. But you gradually lift yourself from a state of understanding less to one of understanding more. And when people are said to be enlightened, it's a quantitative determination. They grasp more knowledge, more facts, they make more connections, and suddenly the measure changes by an indifferent quantitative difference. A little bit of information will strike a spark in the mind, and suddenly, whoa, I understand, I'm illuminated. So yeah, and this is highly skilled reading. So he says that the art of reading, so for him it's an art, it depends on skill and talent and creativity in a way. I could speak of the science of reading, but then again, what is the difference between art and science? That's a philosophical question. Science requires talent also. So in the view of Hegel, science and art are one and the same. So sometimes I can't help laughing because yeah. The process, so the art of reading is the process whereby a mind with nothing to operate on but the symbols of the readable matter elevates itself by the power of its own operations. And this is an alchemical process. The mind enters the world with limited knowledge, limited capabilities, and by transforming the external world into thoughts and logical categories and into grasping a greater understanding of the external world, the mind elevates itself to ever higher level of understanding. And the lead turns into gold, symbolically. The things that are usually regarded as more difficult deserve and demand this kind of reading. So if you think that a book is worthy of being studied because it contains gold, one should spend a lot of time and put in a lot of effort, which are extensive and intensive quantitative determination, in order to understand it. And each book, he says it later, but I express it in my own words, each book has its own measure. in the sense that there are books you shouldn't spend more than a few minutes, a few dozens of minutes to read the structure of the book, the beginning, the end, the conclusion, a couple of ideas here and there, but these books are not worthy of much of your time, and every book must be read with the proper measure. So you have to adapt a certain quantity of time and effort invested in the book depending on the quality of the book. And one can quickly, when one is trained, realize whether a book is worthy of being invested a lot of time in or not. And there are books, religious books, and for the Marxist, Das Kapital is a religious book. For the Muslims, the Quran. For the Christian, the Bible. For the Hegelians, Hegel's logic and the phenomenology. These are the kind of books which have a great measure of knowledge, and they are worthy of being read and read again and studied. And if you just study the book without studying other books and the world around you, you will not understand. And sometimes the best way of gradually increasing your understanding of a book is to leave it aside for a moment, to explore the world, to explore other books, to talk with people, and then to come back to the book, and you will have realized that this experience of the world will have increased and enlightened your perspective, and suddenly things which were not clear or intelligible before you had experienced the world will become much more intelligible. So yeah, such things which are more difficult may increase our store of information, but they cannot improve our understanding. So there's a difference between an empirical, purely quantitative perspective on the world. A knowledgeable person is a person who could have, who could speak about many facts, many events, a person with a broad memory. But if you just can enumerate the facts without understanding the logical structure that unite them, you may be knowledgeable, but you may be an ignorant fool. And real knowledge requires this quantitative aspect of knowledge, because in order to be really knowledgeable and to have a real understanding of reality, one has, to a certain extent, to have a quantitative knowledge of facts in the broad outline. But real understanding comes from the conceptual grasping, the ability to make the logical connections between the manifold events. So that's the difference between history, which is just the enumeration of facts, and historiography, which is a conceptual understanding of history. And every good historian needs an epistemology, needs a conceptual view of his own field of knowledge, because if you just enumerate the fact without a logical structure, you may be quantitatively knowledgeable, but you will be an ignorant nonetheless. So one must find a proper balance, which is the proper measure between a conceptual understanding of reality and an empirical view of reality. He says that by learning here is meant understanding more, not remembering more information. So there's this to understand, in his view, is to grasp conceptually, to put logical connections between the various phenomena and events. And to remember means to exert the memory and to be able to recite or to quote many facts. But if you do not see the order and the structure between the various facts, then increasing your quantity of knowledge will not help you. But hopefully the two must coincide, and in the mind of God, quantitative knowledge and qualitative knowledge must be one. And he says, a person who knows some of the facts of American history and understands them in a certain light can readily acquire by reading more such facts and understand them in the same light. but there may be a reading of a history which will be which will reveal more light on all the facts he knows. So that's what Hegel means when he talks about reason in history. There's I've just said it, you can have a quantitative understanding of history if you do not have the qualitative aspect, and the two must coincide eventually, but if you do not have the structure or the order or the logical aspect, knowing an infinite amount of facts will be useless. He says that when reading a book, there is an initial inequality, again, quantitative determination, and Hegel says that in order for two things to be unequal, they must be equal in a certain regard. Inequality of revenue, of income, means that the two persons are equal citizens of the same country. So in every inequality, there's equality. So there is an initial inequality in understanding, but between the reader and the author, because apparently or supposedly the author knows more about the topic than the reader. If it's not the case, there's a problem. The reader must be able to overcome this inequality in some degree. Equality, clarity of communication, can be achieved by putting a certain emphasis on the meaning of words. The first task of any writer or any person who shares knowledge is to express the meaning of words, so that the other, which is another mind, might be able to grasp and to make his own the meaning of the words used by the one who shares knowledge. He says that we do not want to express the idea that more facts, increased information, cannot lead to increased understanding or insights, and that it is always easy to distinguish. So this is the ambiguity between the realm of quantity and the realm of quality. So in order to attain enlightenment, one must adopt the proper measure, the proper balance between quantitative facts and qualitative understanding, and they must reciprocally enrich one another. And that's why Hegel says that to study the realm of shadows, which is the mind of God as depicted in his logic, enables one to understand the world, which is just a reflection of this eternal logical idea, I think. He says that sometimes a mere recital of facts can itself lead to greater understanding. He says that you should try to read for the sake of increased understanding, and if you learn to do that, reading for information will usually take care of itself. So that's the piece of advice that I would have. Read philosophy, which is organized, systematized, structured, ordered knowledge, logical knowledge, and always carry with you a philosophical book and try to transform the experiences of your everyday life into philosophical categories. And that's what I'm trying to do. I always have Hegel's logic with me, and I always try to go from experience to conceptual understanding and back and forth, and that's how I work and how I function. Books which are made for the purpose of entertainment are the least demanding, and require the least amount of effort. I will stop there for now, but this book is really great because it is one of the best introduction to philosophy that I can think of, because the author was very, very knowledgeable, he was highly educated, he was very intelligent, and he had the goodwill of willing to share his knowledge with the average person. And his pieces of advice are very good, and if you, whoever you are watching this video, if you have the opportunity, I would recommend that you should buy the book and draw inspiration from the words of Mortimer J. Adler, and hopefully I will have given you the interest in reading this book and to follow its advice. So yeah. I will make, if I can, other videos because it's really interesting, and that's the beginning of knowledge and the first step into entering the realm of philosophy.